Good morning, folks. My name is Dick Fairburn, and this is my first attempt at a YouTube video. I really appreciate you having a look at it, and maybe we can get together over the next few videos I put together, and I can show you that I think I can help you in your goal to be good at protecting yourself with small arms. Whether you're concealed carry, police, military, we all know that we can do better, should do better than we are. Strive to always improve ourselves. Something I'd like to do that I've never seen a lot of YouTube video people do. I started watching YouTube after a number of my colleagues said, Dick, you ought to do a YouTube channel and you ought to tell people some of the stuff you've learned over the years. So I started watching YouTube, especially gun-oriented, self-defense oriented things. And I saw a lot of names that I knew, some people that I knew, Massad Ayoob, Clint Smith at Thunder Ranch, Ken Hackathorn, Larry Vickers. I know who these people are, and you probably know who they are too. You know their credentials, you know their background. But then I saw literally hundreds of kind of self-impressed people spouting stuff on YouTube about self-defense, about firearms training, and I don't know who they are. And they didn't bother to tell me who they are. I've taught law enforcement classes for over 40 years, and in law enforcement, if you're going to stand up there and teach something to a bunch of cops, one of the first things you have to do is kind of give your own bona fides. You have to tell them why you're qualified to stand in front of them and tell them how to do their job. And I'll tell you, training cops is the toughest. They're the hardest audience out there. If they don't like what you're saying, they think you're full of crap, they'll get up and walk out, or they won't come back from lunch. But I've been successful, and so I'm going to follow that pattern here. I'm going to tell you in this first introductory video who I am, what I've done, and why I think I can give you some real meaningful help in improving yourself for self-defense. So, I've been a gun guy ever since I was 18 years old, all my adult life. At 18, I wanted a pistol. Couldn't buy one from a dealer, but I can buy one from an individual. So a buddy of mine, a working cop, went in and bought me my first sidearm, which was a Colt Government Model 45. A few months later, I'd saved up more money. Now I can buy a rifle at 18, so I bought my next major purchase, a Colt AR-15, the old SP1 20-inch model, the original. And I learned how to use it. I started reloading my own ammo and did as much shooting as I could. Then I went in the Army and went through Fort Benning School for Wayward Boys, known as the Infantry School, and swapped my AR-15 for an M16A1. Got to play with all the cool toys that an infantryman uses, the M16, the M60 30 caliber machine gun, M2 50 caliber Browning, the M203 grenade launcher. The cool one was the M72A2 Law. We shot sub-caliber munitions at tanks roving up and down the range out there. And I scored #1 with the sub-munition stuff, so I got to fire the real one, and that was pretty cool. Back here in the People's Republic of Illinois, I became a part-time cop. I went through the mandatory firearms training school for that, and started into meaningful firearms training, and constantly trying to improve myself. Then I went through the police firearms instructor course in 1978, a long time ago. Got an NRA certification for revolvers, pistols, shotguns. I later went through, in my career, I went through the NRA rifle instructor school and had virtually all the police firearms ratings you could as an NRA instructor. I have over 45 years in public safety. Started out as a police dispatcher for a few months. And then, kind of the dirty little secret in my past, then I started out as a firefighter, full-time professional firefighter. Did that for almost 7 years. But along the way, before I got laid off, when the budget and the economy collapsed here in Illinois in the early 80s, they told me that, if you come over to the dark side and be a cop, we're going to let you drive fast cars, shoot cool guns, get in a fight once in a while. So I did. And along the way, I earned a bachelor's degree in law enforcement administration and moved into a career with that. The economy was bad in Illinois, so I ended up going west, finding a job in Wyoming, where I worked for both the police department and the sheriff's department for a number of years. About 10 years in Wyoming total. The last couple of years I was a police chief in a small community there. Wyoming was great. First few years I was out there, if you didn't have a gun in your hand outside of a holster at least once a week, it was slow. It was really kind of the Wild West. Plus, all the hunting and fishing that goes with living in the Rocky Mountains. We loved it. But family obligations brought me back here to Illinois. And when I got here, I ended up joining the Illinois State Police as a civilian, not a trooper. I worked in the Intelligence Bureau for a couple years where I learned analytical skills, went to some great training along that line. Then I went to the academy, and that's where I had gone through the academy as a basic trainee. And I'd always dreamed of having an academy job, and now I had it. For almost 20 years in that career, I was an instructor, I was a program manager, I ran the firearms training range for a while. I got to do all the stuff that frankly, civilians hardly ever got to do there. And it was because I believe that God gave me some skills. It's not that I'm the most wonderful guy in the world. I'm kind of like Rush Limbaugh was. He said, you know, talent on loan from God. And I've tried to build on that over the years. Some of the noteworthy achievements I've had in my career, and this was in Wyoming. When I got to Wyoming, I saw that some of the articles in police magazines to do with guns weren't that great. Some of the guys didn't really know what they were talking about all that much. And I thought, gee, I can do better than that. So I tried. And I published my first article in 1983 in the old Police Marksman magazine. And I've published hundreds of articles in police magazines, police websites ever since then. Up until last year, I spent about 10 years with the police1.com website. When I retired from active law enforcement, I left Police One. I've just joined the masthead of Concealed Carry magazine, part of the U.S. Concealed Carry Association, and I am their carbine columnist now. The first article or two that I have written for them should be out by the time you see this video. So I'm still active as a writer. Some of the notable things I've accomplished: when I was in Wyoming, we wanted to carry patrol rifles, and I had written an article suggesting in Police Marksman that shotguns were not the best long gun for law enforcement, that they should be carrying a carbine. And specifically, I recommended the AR-15, that 5.56 cartridge that was the military round. And I said, you know, it may not be the best battle rifle in the world, but it's almost perfect for law enforcement. There was a lot of feedback from that, so we garnered a couple more articles along that way, and I coined the term patrol rifle. And now we see patrol rifles in the hands of the vast majority of police officers. It's not unusual at all now at a major incident to see cops walking around with an AR-15 slung over their shoulder, ready for action. And I'm proud to say that I had a big piece of putting that together. I did a lot of pistol testing when I was out there, looking at different weapon platforms, different loads. I got the chance to work with Dr. Marty Fackler, U.S. Army surgeon. And he is the guy who developed the 10% gelatin test that is now the FBI standard for testing the ammunition we carry as cops out there. And Dr. Fackler said, you know, the gelatin has to be used under almost laboratory conditions. It's almost impossible to do that in the field and get predictable, repeatable results. But he said, you know, the pistol rounds, they perform almost identically in water if we could just figure out how to make a measurement of how deep they penetrate. So he and I started with Ziploc bags full of water, which were difficult to work with. I eventually went to gallon milk jugs. And I calibrated that by going to Hornady's ammunition factory. I was doing some consulting work for them one time. And I took my consulting fee out in gelatin in their underground test lab. So I took the same loads that I had shot into water jugs, shot them into the calibrated 10% gelatin blocks, and I developed a way for measuring not only expansion and fragmentation, but penetration in water. Anyone can do this at home, and the correlation is about 95%. You're almost going to get the exact same results. It doesn't work that well for rifles, and one of my videos that I'm going to put up here is going to be that testing process for water jugs. You see guys shoot water jugs on YouTube all the time, just for the novelty, I guess, of blowing water all over the place. But the fact is, if you line up several of those jugs and you use the formula that I will give you in that video, you can seriously test pistol ammo and predict the kind of performance you're going to get from it. That was something that I developed on my own. Along the way, I wrote a book on police rifles because there wasn't anything out there, and I had some contacts at Paladin Press And so my first book was called Police Rifles. It's long out of print now. You can still find it occasionally on the internet. I only have one copy of my own. After that book, I was supposed to do one on firearms training, generalized firearms training. It took a while. And it was just because I didn't think I knew enough to really write the book. It took me about another 10 years. But finally I did. And I'll tell you where that book came from. When I went to work for the Illinois State Police and I managed to get out to the academy, my first assignment there was to do a pistol test. They had been carrying 9mm Smith & Wesson pistols of one variety or another since 1967. Illinois State Police led the movement in the United States, first major agency to adopt semi-auto pistols. They had always had some training problems with those pistols, and they had always had some malfunction problems with those pistols, and they worked through a lot of them. But they thought it was time to look at something else, so we did. And I told the academy commander, I said, the first thing I want to do in this pistol test process is I want to look at about a 10-year window of your shootings out on the street. And I want to get a measure of what happens out there, because that could tell us what caliber we need or what pistol would do better. Let's do that first. It took jumping through some hoops with the Internal Investigations Division, but we got there. And what I found was, for the last 10 years, when the troopers shot at bad guys, their hit rate was 11%. 89% of the bullets they fired at a bad guy didn't hit the bad guy. That's the lowest hit rate I've ever seen documented. And when I gave this information to the academy commander, a really smart guy, and Doug looked at me and he said, well, we give them 5 weeks of training in the academy, we give them 5 shoots a year thereafter, and they're shooting that badly? He said, could you tell what the bad guys were doing when they shot at the troopers? And I said, well, there were only 2 instances, and from a statistical point of view, that's not valid. It's too small a sample, but it's interesting. Their hit rate was also 11%. And he looked at me and he said, let me get this right. We give these people a lot of training, and their hit rate is the same as some mope on the street who we assume has no training at all. What the hell are we doing wrong? And I made a kind of a bold statement. I said, well, the problem is, for the last 40 years, you've been training your troopers how to go to the next quarterly Illinois Police Association pistol match, and they win. Your district headquarters are full of trophies and plaques from, the team shoots. But a lot of that shooting was either PPC, which was a kind of an antiquated, semi-realistic police shoot, or bullseye. One hand in your pocket, one hand on the pistol, Camp Perry 25-yard bullseye shooting. That has no realistic use in a gunfight. Now, the old range guy said, oh, hell, if you can punch a small group at 25 yards with one hand, you can surely hit a bad guy at 25 feet. Wrong, 89% of the time. And I said, whatever pistol we ultimately get, we need to do a transition course. Everyone agrees on that. I said, let's make that transition not only from one pistol to another, let's make it from one training technique to another. And I said, as an example, to this day, to 1999, if a trooper had a malfunction during a quarterly qualification, he would put his non-shooting hand in the air, keep the pistol pointed down range, and wait for the range officer to come by, clear the malfunction, and then let him fire the remaining rounds. Alibi shooter with 2 rounds to finish. I said, you've essentially trained those troopers to put their hand in the air and stop firing if they get a malfunction. Out on the street, if they get a malfunction, they need to identify it quickly, do a tap, rack, put it back in action, and get back in the fight. So let's train them to do that. Let's train them how to gunfight. And I said, now, you may not find yourself winning at the quarterly pistol matches from now on, but I don't care about that. I want these guys to win in a gunfight. About 10 years later, that program had been in effect for about 10 years. It was very popular. They ended up adopting the Glock 22 and 23 pistols. Still have them to this day, over 20 years later. We were able to go back and look at another window of their performance on the street, and that 11% hit rate had gone to 62% hit rate. That's the highest I've ever seen documented, from the lowest to the highest. Part of that's the pistol. The Glock is a much easier pistol to master than the older Smith & Wessons, which had double action for the first trigger pull and then single action from then on. Mastering that changing trigger was always rather difficult. So the pistols had a part in that, but mostly it's the training we did. We trained them to go to a gunfight. In fact, one incident every year that they do on the range isn't even live fire. It's simunition, interactive role-playing with real bad guys who are shooting paint bullets back at you. That's how you train people to go to a gunfight. And the difference is, now they're winning them, and they're hitting very well. I documented that training program in my second book, which then I was ready to write. And I called it Building a Better Gunfighter. Paladin Press has shut down now. Paper books just don't sell anymore. I was able to buy out the remaining stock of Building a Better Gunfighter. If you're interested in the book, they're available on either eBay or on my website, dickfairburn.com. They're still there until they're gone, and then they're gone, but we'll probably go to an ebook version of it by then. So that firearms training program made me feel confident that I know how to train people to win a gunfight. And that's, as I said, that's when I was ready to write the book. The next major thing at the Academy became rapid deployment. 1999, the Columbine incident. A lot of kids were killed. There's a lot of criticism of the officers at Columbine because they didn't go in and neutralize the killers. But what you have to remember is they responded exactly the way they had been trained, because they had been trained to contain an incident, isolate it with perimeters, and negotiate if they could while they were waiting for the SWAT team to arrive. Contain, isolate, negotiate. That's what they tried to do. That didn't work. And as a profession, we decided that we can't do that anymore. We have to build a whole new system of response. We have to go into these active shooter events, and we have to kill the killer. That's the only way we can save lives. That became called rapid deployment or active shooter response. We put a program together to train the Illinois State Police. The director at the time did not like the idea, so we kind of had to put it on the shelf for a few years. But the new Academy commander I had bought off on a research program, and I said, let me identify a number of active shooter events in history. Let's talk to the people who were there, let's document what happened, and let's compare that to the first generation of rapid deployment training and see if it looks like it will work. And we debriefed 41 different incidents, from the Texas Tower shooting at the University of Texas in the 60s all the way up to Columbine. And what we found was, no, the first version of rapid deployment training probably won't work, because it was built around the idea of a 4 or 5 officer contact team. And it was going to take so long to get that team up and running at the scene for the officers to arrive, the incident would probably be over, because most of those things were over in 3 to 5 minutes. So when we finally trained it, we trained version 2.0, where we said, you may have to go alone. You may have to be the first cop on the scene and go in and try to hunt down the killer and start to neutralize them. And you're going to have to build your team on the fly as more cops arrive and you get a more powerful unit to go in and do that hunt. That became accepted across the country as version 2.0 of rapid deployment. At the time, working with the NIPUS guys up in Chicago, officers who had trained thousands of police officers in rapid deployment, hundreds of train-the-trainer operations, and I said, guys, I see a flaw in this. First of all, we're training cops to step over bleeding children and continue the hunt. I'm not sure they'll do that. If you see a kid bleeding out from a femoral wound, I got a feeling that they're probably going to stop the hunt long enough to put a tourniquet on. That's just the kind of people cops are. They're not going to leave someone there to die if they can stop it. And I said, the other problem I see is cops respond one at a time from wherever they are when the call goes on. They work as lone wolves. Okay? Cops don't typically work in teams except SWAT teams. I said, so you've got to turn 4 or 5 cops who've worked their entire career by themselves, put them in a team at a critical incident, and then move that team in to the kill zone. And I said, I think we need to train sergeants, corporals, first senior officers, everybody from senior officers up. We need to train them how to break that staggered response cycle, put them into a team, and hunt down the bad guys. And I said, if we don't train the leaders, I think we're going to have a failure. I hate to say I was right, but at Parkland, Florida a few years ago, and at Uvalde, Texas just a few weeks ago, we saw a total breakdown of the rapid deployment system. And it wasn't because they hadn't been trained in rapid deployment. It wasn't because they didn't have enough officers there to do it. It's because they didn't have someone step up, announce himself as the leader, turn into a drill sergeant, and start barking some orders. But I am totally convinced. I've known cops all my life. I know what's going to happen if that person takes charge and says, pick up your weapon and come with me. They will. They will put themselves in harm's way. They will risk their lives to save children. We don't know how many kids bled out in that room at Uvalde, Texas, who should have been in medical care. We'll never know. But too many. One is too many. They had more than enough assets there. A good trainer, Don Always, used to be the lead trainer for the National Tactical Officers Association. In an email, he said, you know, Dick, now that we've seen the videos inside that school, they had every asset they needed in that hallway except one, a leader. We built that leadership school at the Illinois State Police before I retired. It became the promotional school for all the state police sergeants. We opened it up to local agencies and they started coming from all over the country because there's no training like it out there. And when I retired, unfortunately, it died at the State Police Academy. We're trying to resurrect that now after Uvalde and say, you know what, we can't ever let that happen again. That is a permanent stain on the law enforcement profession, and we have to make sure that never happens again. So that's my goal in retirement is to try to get that leadership course out there. I did one here in my hometown before I retired last year, and hopefully we can get that out to a lot more cops out there and break this cycle of just standing around waiting to be told what to do. Then I became kind of an expert at the Academy in ambush killings. We noticed as early as 1996 that the number of cops being killed in ambush situations was in constant growth pattern. And as a gun guy, I looked over the law enforcement officers killed statistics that come from the FBI every year, and I noticed a parallel use of cops being killed with centerfire rifles. And those two trends have continued to drastic proportions. Cops are being killed in deliberate ambushes, and often they're being killed with centerfire rifles. That gives the bad guy a distance advantage, and it gives him the ability to burn through an officer's soft body armor. So for 11 years, I taught a class at the ILETA conference. That's the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. It started off being ambush awareness. Then we moved into ambush survival because we started coming up with some tactics to help. At the end of that, something phenomenal happened because we'd been basing our training on those law enforcement officers killed and assaulted, the numbers that the FBI compiles every year. Unfortunately, when you do that, you're learning from the ones who failed. They were killed. And for several years, I had been asking, there have got to be cops that win ambushes, and we need to find them, and we need to interview them. We need to see what they're doing differently. And it happened. At the Academy, before I retired, I opened up my email one morning, and I had a shocker. And if any of you are trainers of any kind, especially law enforcement or fire where lives are at risk, this is the kind of email you dream of getting, but when you get one, you can't hardly even talk. It almost stops your heart. It said, Mr. Fairburn, I can't sleep this morning, so I wanted to write you a note and say thank you. My partner and I survived an ambush last night because of an article I read of yours on Police One just a couple of weeks ago. Thank you, you saved my life. I still kind of choke up thinking about it. I've had a few of those happen in my life, and I'll tell you, that's as good as it gets. I don't care what they pay you or don't pay you. That's the reward that keeps trainers moving ahead and doing the best they can. So because of the ILETA work, because of some of the classes that I've done in leadership and ambush survival, a lot of my colleagues said, Dick, go do a YouTube channel. You know, some of this is law enforcement specific, but you got things you can give to the concealed carry people out there, the home defense people out there that will help them do a better job. So that's what I'm going to try to do with this channel. The first few episodes I do are going to be talking about the Building a Better Gunfighter. There's two key differences in our training program, and I'll cover them in the very next one and tell you what they are. And then I'll tell you how marksmanship, which is 99% of what we do in firearms training, marksmanship is probably the least important aspect of winning a gunfight. Almost everything else will help you win more than marksmanship. And I'll give you some facts and figures and some research I've done that can kind of prove that. So I'm going to start this video channel. I'm going to see where it goes. It's up to you folks to see if you're interested, if you think I'm worth watching. I don't know where it'll go because I got way too many hobbies. I'm a big game hunter, loved it out in Wyoming, still do it here in Illinois. Love to go fishing. Got a new muskie fishing partner this spring. We caught some really, really big muskies. I'll show you some pictures someday. I like to do woodworking stuff. My wife and I are doing a little kind of a woodworking and craft selling project in our retirement. So that's what I'm doing. That's who I am. And I hope you will come along and watch a couple more of my videos and see if I'm going to give you worthwhile content. And if I do, and you like it, then I do the pitch at the end like everybody else. If you like it, subscribe, hit the thumbs up button, and we'll see what this channel can turn into. So thank you very much for watching in on this first one. Thank you for watching clear to the end to see what I had to say. And I look forward to presenting some new material for you, and we'll have them coming up real soon. Thank you very much. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah. That's all there is till next time.